Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending the meeting of this extra committee meeting for the Neighbourhood and Regeneration Committee. We have changed the timetable very slightly for the sake of completeness, and also to put a little more structure into the afternoon. So let me just go through what we're planning at the moment so everybody knows. We will deal with obviously the first three items, which is apologies, minutes, declarations of interest, progress on outcomes and recommendations. And then we're going to go to public question time, for which we're very grateful. We've had quite a few questions. We'll then go into members' questions time rather than leaving it right till the end. Obviously, we have limited numbers of questions, which is means that we can get a more comprehensive response to those. And then finally, we will go into the main meat of this meeting, which is why we're all here, which is the scrutiny of the draft island planning strategy. Okay, so if we can go to apologies, do we have any apologies? No, we have no apologies. Okay, so I'd like to welcome members of the committee who are here at this moment, which is Councillor Ward, Councillor Quirk, Councillor Beston and Councillor Lever. Thank you for your time and effort. And as I can see from a lot of people, you have, like myself, well annotated versions of the draft island planning strategy. Okay, the minutes of the last meeting, which I have here, I have looked through them. They appear correct. Can I go through the committee and see if there's any changes to any of those? Councillor Quirk? We have a mover and a seconder. Thank you. Any objections? No? Right. Thank you very much. I have to sign them, so I have to remember what my signature is. Thank you very much. Okay, and do we have any declarations of interest from members of the committee? No. Okay, we have no declarations of interest for that. And then we have progress on outcomes and recommendations from previous meetings, fairly short. We had the discussion about the annual waste and recycling survey, and the committee was to revisit the Waste Education Centre. We're waiting for a visit to be organised once the Waste Education Centre is open, which is, I suspect, reasonably soon. Is that, if I could confirm that with Colin? Okay, well, we look forward to that. We've also had a follow-up on our consideration of whether we should change the name of the committee. We've not really gone any further of that. However, sorry, Councillor Quirk, would you like to comment?
In view of the vote at the January meeting about going to a committee system, which may result in this committee disappearing, ultimately, it would seem silly to put too much effort into this and just defer it until after that vote.
That seems entirely sensible. Would you like to move that? Seconded. Everybody in favour of that? Yeah, we'll defer that particular issue for the moment then. Okay, we have received a response to the acquisition strategy, which has been circulated to us, and the draft island planning strategy obviously is before us today. I don't believe there are any other actions or progresses that are required to be discussed at this stage. Okay, we go on to public question time. Now, there's been a large number of questions regarding the dips. I am aware that obviously some of those questions have been answered in writing, and I understand that they will be circulated in the next day or so. And that response will go to all of the people who have put forward all of members of the public who have put forward questions will get a full response to that query. I'm aware that there are a number of general questions which cover the process of DIPS through this committee and as to whether it is appropriate for it to be before this committee and to take our view on that. I would like to address that directly by asking members of the committee. I have been given two specific things coming out of it. One, that the process is undemocratic, or you may have a response to that. And two, that the process is being rushed. My particular view, which I think I've put out to quite a number of people, is that the draft island planning strategy has been in progress for quite a number of months, many months. In fact, it predates me being a councillor, although I was taking notice beforehand, of course, as any sensible person would be. I also note that there have been amendments which are before us today, but they are relatively straightforward and simple compared to the size of the draft island planning strategy. I'm also aware that the reason we're here today is because we, as committee members, decided that we would call it here so that it could be scrutinised again properly before the possibility that it arrived at full council on the 17th of January. We can place recommendations before the cabinet, who will then deal with it as they see fit, and then obviously full council will take notice of what has happened so far. So I'd just like to go around the committee and ask for your opinion as to whether you are happy with the process as of today and going forward towards January. If I start here with Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. In a nutshell, yes. I've had a few emails into my inbox of questions, I think probably alluding to the similar themes that you're talking about, which is talking about me personally, but I think it's probably mistaken because I've not done anything personally here, rushing this DIPS through a process and doing so without, I guess, ample opportunity for debate or discussion. My view is that this is just one of those opportunities that actually provides that debate and discussion. The DIPS itself has been, well, the council has been trying to pass a planning strategy since before I was a councillor, and so I don't know if anybody can give me an exact time, but maybe 2019. And the process, we've been on a process whereby a draft was brought to full council earlier this year, or perhaps the back end of last year. It was not back at the time. It's been through a process again to come before us with amendments to it. We've decided to bring it into this committee so we can scrutinise it as a committee. It will then go to cabinet with any recommendations we may make. After cabinet, it will then go on to full council where it can be debated and discussed again, before at which point we will approve. Now, at that point, my understanding, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is it doesn't just pass then, it moves on to the next phase of scrutiny, which is involves a load more consultation, the inspectorate to get involved. There's a whole process beyond that point. So I believe we're about, even if it passes at the next full council, we're still a year or two before it could be potentially adopted. So that to me isn't rushing anything. And I believe we've had ample opportunity to discuss and debate this, and we will continue to do so in the future. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but I thought the email, I've not been able to respond to the emails I've had, so hopefully that suffices.
Thank you, Councillor Lever. That's very helpful. Just for clarification, the first all-member briefing on draft IPS was in July 21. I'd like to offer the floor to Councillor Biston.
Thank you. You've both encapsulated the whole thing very well. I see this as the very start of the consultation, if you like, on the planning strategy. It's been around for a long time. As members, we've all had an opportunity to comment and made comment before now. This session here today gives us another opportunity to do that, without a doubt. And as Joe quite rightly says, there's many more stages to come. So I'm more than happy to proceed.
Councillor Quirk.
This is the policy and scrutiny committee for neighbourhoods and regeneration. Core element of the drives, all of that is the island plan. It would be absolute nonsense for this committee not to be considering the document that actually drives the whole purpose of us being here. So I totally support it. As one who's been involved even on this, even before James took over the reins of it, it's been going on for the last 6 years. We need to sort of get a new island plan. There will be differences of opinion as to the emphasis on it, but what we need in it is an island plan that actually works for the islands. I'm supportive.
Councillor Ward.
Chairman, thank you. I don't think there's much left to say. My colleagues have virtually covered it all. But I think we're in one of those situations that we are never going to satisfy everybody. There will always be people who will object to one element or the other. And I just think we have to try our best. As Councillor Quirk said, regeneration is important to more important to some areas of the island than others. And my focus is on that. I want the Bay Area regenerated, and we need a tool to do it with. And this is the basis of that tool. So yes, there may be hiccups in it, but what plan doesn't? And I think we have to do our best to help the council move along, and our planning department. I know some of the officers there pull their hair out with us because we won't make a decision and so on and so forth. We just need to get on with it. Thank you.
Councillor Ward, thank you very much for that. I think that's very clear. The idea behind that was to give the public a clear idea of how we felt our particular committee could deal with the issues and queries before us. The questions which have been asked, the factual answers to those will be provided tomorrow. I'm not going to read them out because obviously that would take quite a amount of time and I don't wish to waste anybody else's time. I'm aware there is a member of the public waiting above us eagerly, and I'm very grateful for people who attend. So I assume you have a question and would like to ask it. Okay, if you could give us your name.
My name is Dominic Hicklin.
Thank you, Dominic. I appreciate your time and I'm very grateful for you being here. I'd like to ask you a question.
Okay, I will try and read. I'm not good at it. With the Isle of Wight facing 5 of the 10 worst sewage discharge rates in southern England, how can the committee justify pushing forward the island development plan, ignoring the certainty of increased sewage discharges due to added market housing and disregarding imminent legislative changes that could lower building targets? The plan's push for grey water separation in new developments is futile without a direct infrastructure link to Sandown, and this increased housing will undoubtedly lead to to more sewage problems. Given the council's responsibility for public health and environmental protection, why not halt the plan's progression now? This pause could allow the integration of upcoming legislative changes and potentially shift to advisory rather than mandatory targets for the next 15 years. Isn't it prudent to avoid starting the planning process anew, ensuring the plan aligns with both environmental needs and future legislative requirements?
Mr. Hickling, thank you very much for that. I appreciate you being here and speaking so well. Actually, you read better than my first question before members here many years ago, so thank you. Obviously, that's also a written question, and we have an answer to that. But in case anybody, in case the council itself would like to add further to that, I'd like to offer Councillor Fuller the opportunity as cabinet member in charge to add to that, assuming that he does have the answers readily in front of him.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think the purpose of the IPS is to ensure that we have modern, up-to-date policies to challenge some of the planning applications that we have in place. Flooding, we've seen over the last couple of months some of the issues also with flooding and coastal protection issues. What we have done is we have listened to what residents have told us about sewage discharges. We have been working very closely, and I'm going to move to James in a minute, with Southern Water to make sure that future housing is more resilient to some of the infrastructure that is required. Sorry if that is not a full enough question, but answer, but I will hand over to James because I know James has had one-to-ones with Southern Water on how we can actually improve things and reduce the amount of sewage discharge that goes into our coastline, because nobody wants dirty beaches.
If that's okay with you, Chair, it's probably easy if I just read out the response that's been prepared to the written question.
I'm quite happy if we do that. You have an opportunity for a supplementary question after this, of course. Please, Mr. Brewer.
Okay, I can't say that first, because, so the DIPS contains a number of policies, including INF1, EV13, EV14, EV15, and C1, that seeks to strengthen the policy requirements for new development around the issue of flooding, including requirement explicitly set out in policy EV13 and EV14 to separate foul and surface water in new development, though surface water doesn't connect to the sewer system to help alleviate flooding. Draft policies in the plan require grey water separation to ensure that surface water from new development does not connect into the combined sewer, or if it does, it provides a betterment to current runoff rates from the type of sites being developed. At present, there have been no legislative, and I also struggle with that word, changes in relation to the calculation of housing need and how this is addressed within local plans. It should be noted that housing figures calculated using the standard method are already not mandatory as set out in the current NPPF, and the draft IPS includes a housing requirement for the island that is 38% lower than the standard method figure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Would you like to ask a supplementary question?
I'll try and think of one. It's been said to some people, including our MP, I believe, that the application of exceptional circumstances, which would further lower our requirement, especially for market housing, which, given the census data, we don't require as much of as is being touted around. It's been said that that could be included at a later date without having to restart the process again. I believe this has been said to be untrue by senior members of the planning staff. Could you confirm my suspicion that this is the case?
Thank you for that. I'd like to ask, I understand that Mr. Brewer is speaking again.
Yeah, happy to provide a response on that one. So the question was around if we wanted to go down the route for exceptional circumstances at some point in the future, could that be incorporated into the DIPS, or would we need to start again? I think that's the effectively we'll start again, but do something different. So yeah, the advice is very much that if we did need to go down an exceptional circumstances route, then that would be a new plan, because that's a new evidence base. That's a whole new, firstly, calculation of what that housing need is under exceptional circumstances, what goes into the pot, and then what that looks like on an island-wide basis. Obviously, that would require the current DIPS to be stopped, and there are opportunities to do that in the process. So if we did go through full council in January and the decision was made to publish, at any point after that, we can stop and then revert to to production of a new plan if that's what's decided as the route the council wants to take. And it could be that we get right up to examination. The plan can be withdrawn from examination. We could even get through the examination, as has happened at Castle Point Council, where they took the plan all the way through the examination. The inspector recommended it get adopted, and the council decided not to adopt it and go down a different route and do a different plan. So that's effectively the two routes. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Thank you very much. I appreciate your question and supplementary. I'm never quite sure. Would you like to hold for members' questions? We'll go into members' questions in a moment if you'd like to bring that in at this stage. Just to say thank you for the public questions. You're welcome to stay. We will try and keep you completely awake as we try and keep every single member of this committee awake. I have questions raised from one member of the committee, and then we'll go into public questions. Into members' questions.
You haven't read out the letters of query, objection, questions. Are there any themes there that we should be aware of that come out that we might want to consider specifically if there is a pattern of information?
We will make sure that you've got a copy of those answers. You have a copy. I should know that the Democratic Services are far ahead of me. You should have copies. Have you got, as members, do you have? So you haven't. Fine. You got another one. Just okay, so I've handed a copy of the questions and responses to some of the member councillors who are here. I'll see if we can find another copy to make sure that you can see those easily. The formal, the blue one I need. No, that's not on. That's that one. So the answer is, Councillor Quirk, that there are a number of fairly complex themes throughout, and you will see that from looking through those. I don't want to exercise those at this stage. I suspect that some of the additional members here may wish to exercise some of those at the appropriate time. So if we can move on to members' questions. I'd like to take the first question from Councillor Adams. Would you like to read your question out, Councillor Adams?
Question is, how many disposals of council assets have occurred during this financial year? What is their aggregate value, and how many and of what aggregate value have not been fully, including value, terms, contract parties, etc., publicly disclosed? Does this committee believe that hiding the terms of such disposals of council, i.e. public assets, is open and transparent?
The one yesterday.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I thought it was a very good question, but perhaps not for this particular committee. It shows you're way ahead of us.
I think the problem, Chair, is we got the emails today with some of the answers to our questions, but only this afternoon, when many of us were already in other meetings. So the fact that they've only just come out, we haven't even had the opportunity to share them amongst each other, let alone to see the answers and questions raised by any of the other 39 members of the council.
Thank you for that. I take. I was actually quite interested in that question myself, so thank you very much. I think it's probably worth going. We only have 2 written questions from members, for which I'm grateful for. Not that there's only 2, that you've actually made that effort. I certainly appreciate that. So what I will suggest then is, at this stage, I will read out the question, unless you wish to. I'm sure Councillor Spink would be quite happy to read his own question out. It is there. You have a question. Okay. So I will read out the questions, and then I will read out the answers, and then I will give you both, obviously, the opportunity to speak to those. And then Councillor Jarman, if you wish to ask a question, I will then move to you. So first of all, Councillor Adams, your question was policy H1 on pages 92 and 163 of the new DIPS. Have the figures for those areas of Nettleston been amended in this revision from the earlier numbers? And 2, do they relate to extent, planning permission, or provide an expectation of additional permissions? Now, we could ask officers to read it out, but quite honestly, I think Mr. Brewer is going to be quite busy anyway, so I'll read it out. The officer's response, this is the officer's response, is that the housing numbers provided in the table in draft policy H1 set out that within the Nettleston and Seaview designated neighbourhood area, there are currently 3 sites that already have planning permission for a combined total of 78 units that have yet to be built. The sites and planning permissions references are listed in Appendix 1 of the draft IPS, plus a windfall allowance across the plan period, 15 years, of 30 units, which matches that within all of the other designated neighbourhood areas. There are no proposed site allocations, i.e. sites that do not already have planning permission, within the designated neighbourhood area of Nettleston and Seaview. On the 30th of May, 2023, Nettleston and Seaview Parish Council were informed that the formal designation of a neighbourhood area would result in a housing requirement figure appearing in the next version of the draft IPS, and the basis of how that figure would be generated. On the 2nd of June 2023, the same Parish Council confirmed they were happy to proceed and for the IWC, the Isle of Wight Council, to formally designate the neighbourhood plan area. I recognise that you have not had a chance to consider that answer completely, but in case you wish to add anything else, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to ask a supplementary question. Okay, and then we'll move on to Councillor Spink's question. Sorry, do you have it in front of you now, Councillor Spink, or shall I read it out? Okay, that's fine, of course. The question is, the DIPS seeks to facilitate the delivery of 453 houses per annum. What evidence is there to suggest that this figure is deliverable? Given that we are in the cost of living and housing crisis, why is there not a strategy in the Alliance-led DIPS prioritising council-owned land for social housing? And I will give you the officer's response to give you time to consider any additional question. The housing requirement within the DIPS, 453 per annum, is calculated using historic delivery rates on the island over previous 15-year plan periods. It is accepted that in some years delivery may fall below this figure, and in other years it may exceed it. For example, in 2021, on the island there were 445 completions. In 21-22 there were 490 completions, and in 22-23 there were 357 completions. Recent longer-term averages are the 5-year average equal 379, or 10-year average 380. 15-year average 410, and the 20-year average 460. Using 15-year plan periods allows different economic cycles to be reflected. The DIPS provides a suite of policies and requirements applicable to all development proposals, regardless of land ownership, that must represent viable delivery opportunities. The sites allocated within the DIPS that are owned by IWC could be prioritised for social housing. However, that is a decision for the IWC as landowner, not the IWC as local planning authority in its role as decision maker, determining planning applications against policy requirements. And I'd like to pass over to Councillor Spink for any comment he may wish to make.
My supplementary question to that is this, that in the days rather distant now of the Regulation 18 consultation, if my memory serves me correctly, the figure that was said to be deliverable was, I think, about 470 something. Pardon? 486. So the figure that in then was said to be 486, and I think that was back in 2021. I think it went to consultation in October 2021. Now, a reduction to 450, a reduction to 453 is, off the top of my head, about 30, if that, 30 houses per year reduction. The 486 was said to be aspirational. Is it realistic, given what has happened since the figure of 486? What has happened is we've had a cost of living crisis, and the state of the construction industry is far worse than it was back in 2021 with the rising cost of materials. In addition to that, the last presentation to corporate scrutiny was that because presumably of the dip in the economy, the number of planning applications in the last quarter had gone down and that this was likely to continue. So is a reduction of about 30 houses per year actually a significant enough reduction, taking into account the changes in the economy? And what evidence is there to show that we can build 453 houses a year, other than past performance?
Councillor Fuller, would your colleagues within the council like to respond to that?
I will refer it to Mr. Brewer. One of the things I would like to add is that without a plan, we have to go to the standard methodology figure, which is substantially higher, 730 houses per year. It's, you know, that is the choice that we have to make. But because your question, Peter, is quite technical, I'm going to ask James to respond to that, because I'm sure he will have a much more clever response than I do. But thank you very much for the question. And I think it is a question that resonates quite widely with local residents. So thank you for that, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. So I think the simple answer really is that the plan, it looks ahead over a 15-year plan period. So we are in a current economic cycle. That economic cycle may well change. We don't know how long that's going to be, which is why one of the reasons the number in the plan uses that longer period to effectively calculate what we could be delivered over a long period. So there are a number of years in the last 15, 20 years where delivery has been at 600, 700. Equally, there are years where it's been 200, 220. So that's why the figure is calculated as it is. Absolutely, the current economic conditions are not conducive to development. There's a number of reasons for that. What we don't know is how long that's going to last and whether that's going to change. The number of factors that play into that, which is why the plan period is 15 years and why we have to some extent, do a bit of crystal ball gazing when you're doing local plan making. So that's the simple answer. It's a 15-year plan period. We have done 453 in the past on a number of occasions. Equally, we haven't done it on a number of occasions. But what we can't do, and the planning guidance and legislation doesn't allow us to do, is to effectively pin ourselves for a longer period of time to a number which perhaps is at the lower end if we're in a particular part of the economic cycle, and equally the other way, we didn't want to pin it too high if we're at a peak in the boom in the economy. You wouldn't want to do the same thing if you're saying, well, actually we did 600, 700 last year, let's pitch it up at that, because we think that can repeat over 15 years. So that's why.
Councillor Fuller.
Chairman, thank you very much. I think one of the other things we also have to bear in mind is government expectation. There is a government expectation that we develop 300,000 homes every year in the UK. When they do their algorithm for the island, that is why they come to the number that they do, because we have to meet that government target that is made. I think what we may see is a change in the future. However, under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, we never saw that policy come through about reducing housing numbers. If that policy does come through from government, then we would have to look at this again. But at the moment, we are not in that place. It's unfortunate, but we are being guided really from government housing targets and trying to meet those. What we have said under our special circumstances is that the 730 figure is not sustainable for the island, and I think the arguments that we have found through the evidence that we've got, which has been upheld by the KC acting on our behalf, has said that that number that we've gathered with the evidence that we've provided is a reasonable number to fall in line with.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Right, I would like to pass on to Councillor Jarman if he would like to raise a question at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for arranging the session today. We're very pleased to see the meeting described as giving us an opportunity to have a deep dive into this document, and we want to take full advantage of that deep dive, and also to thank you for ensuring that all members of the council were invited to this meeting if they wanted to take part. Having got those out of the way, the first thing I'd like to raise is to note that a number of my and my colleague in the West Whites residents have received written confirmations by email that should this document go forward into section 19, that during that process it can be revised to a case for exceptional circumstances, substantially revising the contents of the document. Those emails have come from our MP, and I wondered whether it would be possible to invite the planning department to confirm that that is not the case to the MP, and perhaps request that those emails cease and that corrective emails are sent out to the residents that have received that indication.
That's a very interesting question because it references central government, and as this is a scrutiny committee, not a full council, I will refrain from making a response that I might otherwise make. However, I would like to ask the planning department through Councillor Fuller to provide some sort of response to that.
Thank you, Ollie. If you, as the head of the, as the head of the, okay, it looks as though you're going to have more James.
Almost as good as possible.
I would love to be able to answer that one. Thank you, Chris.
I'll simply probably refer to what was said in response to the public question earlier on, which is the advice from the officers at the council was very much that if an exceptional circumstances plan is the route that the council may wish to choose to go down in the future, then that isn't simply a case of rubbing out a number and then replacing it with another one and carrying on. It is a new evidence base. It is a new plan. Quite whether the MP is sending out a different message, that's entirely up to him. I'm not going to obviously take back his emails. That's entirely up to him to do so. But the advice from your professional officers is that if you want to go down an exceptional circumstances route in the future, that would be a new plan, a new evidence base, and we'd have to go back to Reg 18. But as I said earlier, the process allows the current dips to pause, be withdrawn, stop at any point, right up to adoption, should the council wish to do that, should the circumstances be there for the council to change tack.
Councillor Fuller.
Thank you very much. I think, certainly talking to the MP, I spoke to Mr. Seeley a couple of days ago about this, and he was discussing with me about the exceptional circumstances argument. And one of the things that we were offered to have at the end of spring was a new an NPPF or a Levelling Up Act that would have exceptional circumstances for islands. That would be fantastic for the Isle of Wight. At the moment, it hasn't happened. However, talking to Mr. Seeley a couple of days ago, he seems to think that there may be NPPF with those exceptional circumstances criteria. That was what he was suggesting may happen. Now, that always comes with a caveat. If legislation does come forward in a couple of weeks' time, saying that they want to have a argument for exceptional circumstances for Ireland, it doesn't bed down straight away. It can take several years to be able to do that. What we need to do is we need to have a plan in place so we can look at the exceptional circumstances and make sure that we can incorporate those once they are implemented. But at the moment, we don't know. We don't know where we've been looking in our crystal ball with this matter for the last 12 months. And unfortunately, at the moment, we haven't got anything that we can take back to the planning officers and say, look, this is a game changer for the island. We haven't got that at this moment, but we are waiting patiently, and who knows, that could be a Christmas present for the Isle of Wight, but that won't change things overnight. We still have to work with what we have in front of us at the moment. That is how I understand. I may have got that wrong, but that is the way that is the assurance that I've been given from the MP.
Thank you for that answer, Councillor Fuller. Again, Councillor Jarman, would you like to have a supplementary to that, please?
Yes, I'm not sure what the answer was yes or no to that question. It was very long-winded and in parts, but the key thing is that we need to avoid the circumstances where residents, and indeed now in one case at least one parish council, is misinformed as a fact. And so we've got a choice here. Either the information is provided to the MP, which I think would be a very good way. Perhaps the Casey advice you've got under an in-confidence agreement, share that with him so that he is correctly informed as to the process. I can't see anything wrong or adverse with that in any way. And if you're happy, I would take forward the written answer that Mr. Brewer has just given and share that with the parish councils as well as a definitive position on the matter, so that they are likewise not misinformed on the matter. Would that be an acceptable conclusion to that first question?
If I can add to that, the answers to all of the written questions are public, and therefore by definition they should be available to whoever those people wish to pass them on to. So obviously parish council and like. Can I just confirm from my point of view, it has been said over a period of time that things might happen. Can the council confirm that there is no provision, no additional provision for the island in the current levelling up bill?
Not at the moment, no.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Okay. We should move on. Unless we have any more, I don't see anybody, I don't see, I'll take any online, but I don't see any of my councillor colleagues online, so I suspect that they're not going to answer any questions from that. Councillor Jarman had his hand up for another question, so obviously I will go straight to him for an additional question.
Chair, I would be happy to defer to Councillor Ward. He's indeed a member of the committee first.
Chairman, I don't have a question. What I do have is a request, really, from 2 or 3 of my constituents. They live in the area around Moreton Brook, which has flooded quite considerably. Luckily, none of the flooding has impinged in their homes, but their gardens have been flooded. And what they're asking is, could we, in the new plan, look more closely at where we grant planning permission on greenfield sites and potential floodplains? That's the request. It's not a question as such.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ward. When we get to the dips itself, I'm going to give a very brief preamble. And I think part of that will reflect that as well.
Okay.
If I can move to Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the demographics which are included here. The forecast back in 2011 was for the population of the island to increase by something in excess of 20 odd thousand. In fact, it increased by 2,100 over the 10-year period, which equates to 210 people per year. The figure which is projected in the document now is a similar figure as a projection, that it will rise by around 18,000, but with some departures, giving a net increase of about 11,000 over that period. Given the first figure was grossly inaccurate, the credibility of the second figure must be taken equally with a pinch of salt. It's also been said by a similar individual we were talking of just now, that indeed in the future the population of the island will decrease. And I see Mr. Brewer nodding his head here because he's heard the same piece of information. So even were it to increase by that, which I believe to be grossly inflated figure of 11,000 over the 10-year period, we are planning in the document to build 6,800 new dwellings on this island over that 10-year period. That seems to be, rather than looking as an annual figure, 6,800 over the period of this document, an enormous number of homes, and I've read the allocation of those in some detail. So I would like to know what opportunity there would be during the life of this document, which is 15 years up to 2038, what opportunity there would be to revise that target figure according to actual demographics if they prove to be substantially less than those currently predicted.
Apologies, I was trying to go through the plan. I knew it was there. I'm just trying to find the figures. I would like to pass to, I can see the figure going down the line and Mr. Brewer appears to be the man with the figures there. Mr. Brewer.
The simple answer is if section 10 of the DIPS is around kind of future review and monitoring, and one of the triggers we've put in there is around housing and looking at housing delivery and actually looking at that housing number. And if we get a certain amount of completions for 3 consecutive years we put in there, then we would review that housing figure. So there is the opportunity to do plan reviews. It's something that is becoming, I won't say more popular, but more common. Local plan examinations, not that there are many of those going on at the moment across the country, but certainly some of the ones that I've been involved recently, you have inspectors who perhaps not entirely sure about a particular issue would say, I would want the council to do a plan review on that particular issue within this particular time frame, and they will set that as one of their recommendations. So for example, they could say on the topic of housing, the inspector will require the council to undertake a plan review on that particular topic, whether it's housing number, sites, etc., within a set period of time, and then we'd have to do that. In terms of obviously, just to comment on population, obviously population growth isn't the only thing that feeds household formation. Lots of other factors are at play. Obviously, members will be aware we circulated some KC advice and some advice from GL Hearn about this time last year on this particular issue. For example, divorce, people growing up, going out of home, etc. All those things contribute towards household formation. It's not just population growth. And obviously, as has been stated already, the plan looks at 15 years. So that's a long period of time. We have to try and consider what some of those demographic changes may be. So that's my answer on that.
Thank you. I was going to call you councillor there. I apologise. You're very rude. Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Councillor Jarman, do you like to ask anything following that?
Yes, I have I've prepared quite a number of questions as we go through it for our,
Okay.
for our deep
Perhaps-
dive.
Perhaps, but there,
For just one general point, just for clarification, I assume just as the questions in advance and their answers will be on the website, I assume all the member questions from this section and the answers will also be on the website.
the meeting itself is actually being recorded and is available to anybody online. I'm not sure that there will be additional questions. Just let me confirm. Right, so anything we got before the meeting or anything the council received before the meeting, then those will be the answers to those will be put online. And then subsequent questions which members have asked here, the answers will be provided and also be available in the next set of minutes. And obviously you will get copies of those at the time. In relation to the approach which we're taking today, as you know, I've allocated a period of time for members' questions from the other councillors, people who aren't actually on the committee. I restricted that to 3 minutes, but in fact I've extended that to 5 minutes because quite clearly there aren't going to be a lot of councillor questions. So the very least I can do is give you as much time as possible. So if you'd like to hold those questions until the next period, that's fine by me. I know that Councillor Spink wanted to ask an additional one at this stage.
If I could just ask one then at this stage. We're currently trying to schedule with 6 local residents groups. I wrote to you about this earlier today. Meetings to discuss the revised version of the DIPS and also to schedule it with meetings with our local parish councils and to circulate it to the parish councillors to collate their respective inputs and the residents' inputs. The scheduling of those meetings is rather difficult now because many of them don't meet until January or indeed February. And I wondered what was the plan or what is the mechanism for them to contribute comments on this version of the DIPS?
My understanding is that we've called it in obviously here to give as much opportunity as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be additional questions anyway. Once it leaves our hands with any recommendations we make, it will then pass to Cabinet. I would be very surprised if Cabinet did not respond to any recommendations or suggestions coming from other third parties. I know that the planning department has handled quite a number of queries over that time. So that's my understanding, but perhaps it's better if I pass over to Councillor Fuller and his team to respond.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions that we had prior to this meeting are really, really important. People are worried about future housing on the island. People are worried about what is going to be happening in the future, and certainly there is a lot of uncertainty out there. What I would like to see happen, and this is only my suggestion, is that questions that are raised where there is a common theme, and I think there are several common themes that we've seen coming out in the last couple of weeks, I would like to see them being put as frequently asked questions somewhere that is accessible for members of the public. So I think that that is something that, you know, which I want to take forward from this evening's meeting. I think that it's about making sure that residents aren't misinformed, as you mentioned earlier on, Councillor Jarman, and people know that they can go somewhere where they can get the answers that they need. A lot of the questions that we have that have come through replicate a lot of other questions that we have, and if I can sort of like talk to the team and to make sure that those can be seen openly and clearly, then I think that will help things. But again, we still have the element of going to councillors, members of the cabinet, and asking them questions as well. So again, if there are questions, please let me and the team know. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. I think it might just be helpful for councillors if I just set the scene a little bit more. And forgive me if you're already aware of this. This is a draft version of a plan that, if it is agreed by full council, will be published for public consultation. The draft that is being prepared by officers, and which your officers are advising you they consider to be sound, and where it has been able to do so, has taken into account the significant levels of public consultation that have already been undertaken to date. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bolter. Right. So before we move on to the next section, I understand, Councillor Spink, you have a final additional question.
Please, thank you, Chair. The majority of the development over the next 15 years will be by allocated sites. Allocated sites, the approach to allocated sites, they're allocated by the SHLA. The SHLA, they're allocated, as I understand it, by the SHLA process. And in fact, I looked on the website today, and that is the process on the website by which they are allocated. I see Mr. Bolter shaking his head, and we're here in a moment. In any event, the allocated sites have always been approached by a planning committee on the basis that they are no more than sites that are ready and available for development if planning committee wishes to grant permission should an application be made. Now, the new DIPS that we're considering changes that, and the wording of the new DIPS, it's paragraph 6.15, makes the allocation of the site by whatever process it is, and I had thought and still think it's the SHLA, but it makes, and this is the important point, it makes the allocation as part of the planning process. So when it then comes, it's still necessary to have a planning hearing, but provided the process has been correctly followed, the wording of paragraph 6.15 is that planning committee is limited to considering the detail, not the principle of development. Now, that is rather like, for example, an outline planning consent. When it then comes back, you can only consider the detail. That is a major change to the DIPS. And I don't know, for example, if ward councillors in whose ward they have substantial allocated sites have been made aware of this change and what their constituents think to this change. So I repeat, my understanding is, tell me if I'm wrong, that that paragraph changes the status so that the allocation process grants in principle that development is correct. So that it grants the in principle of development. So my question is that right? Secondly, has it changed? Which I believe it to be the case. And thirdly, has there been proper consultation on it?
Thank you, Councillor Spink. That is probably one of the longer questions I've listened to, and I think I've tried to hold on to most of it, but I suspect that Councillor Fuller and his team may have a better response on that. I'd like to pass over to Councillor Fuller, who will doubtless
refer it to Ollie and James. Ollie.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair. Yes, and apologies. I shouldn't have interrupted like that, so please accept sincere apologies. No, I think it might just be helpful to everyone if I can just clarify the process through which we have been through in identifying potential sites for allocation and then the way in which they are formally made. So yes, the sites that are proposed for allocation in the draft IPS in front of you have been considered through a process known as the SHLA. So that's the Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, and that has followed government guidance. In fact, that is the expected mechanism through which that happens. Now, that process includes a range of different input, and that's both from professional planning officers through elected members who are present at the time, and also through representatives of the development sector. Now, the important point thereafter, I think, is to draw the distinction between a SHLA panel making a recommendation as to whether a site could be considered suitable for allocation, as to whether it met the various criteria that the government would provide on those, to then ultimately a decision solely made by planning officers as to whether to propose to put the site forward as a proposed allocation in the draft IPS. And yes, Councillor Spink, you are correct. The mechanism for allocating a site is through the development plan document, as the IPS would be upon adoption. That is the only mechanism available to us to allocate a site, other than some instances regarding brownfield registers, etc. But this is the main and recognised route for doing so. Now, councillors, I'm sure, will be aware that under the current planning policies that we use of the core strategy, there are no allocations. So as such, we are guided by the locational policies and the use of, I'm sure, that well-known phrase, immediately adjacent the settlement boundaries. The approach that is proposed through the DIPS is significantly different to that, and is deliberately done following feedback and to try and give certainty to all stakeholders around the approach and around the sites specifically that the council would wish to see come forward for development should they be adopted. You'll have to forgive me, I think that's picked up on probably two of the limbs of the question. There may be a third.
Yes, I can help, Chair, if that's all right. The other point is that there's a change, significant change in policy, because now, once it's adopted, and that is when the draft plan is approved by full council, those sites that are then adopted are considered, as far as planning committee is concerned, to be developed, to be suitable for development in principle. And unless, therefore, there is a problem with the allocation, my understanding of the law is that planning committee cannot undo that allocation as being suitable for planning permission. So in other words, it takes away from planning committee the decision whether or not to grant lawful development. It simply remains with planning committee then to look at the detail. So that's a major change in policy. That's my question.
Councillor Fuller, if you'd like to pass that on to the appropriate officer, that would be very sensible.
I'm going to pass this one on to Mr. Brewer.
Thank you. So I guess the first part of the response is that obviously if full council do agree the document in January, the plan is not adopted. That is just agreement to publish the plan for Reg 19. So those sites are not formally allocated.
Sorry, James, I wasn't suggesting that.
All right, sorry, that's just what I heard. Sorry.
Just for clarification, what I was suggesting is that once it is formally adopted, right at the end, when the inspectors approved it, once it's formally adopted by full council, those items which are allocated sites then have the principle of development established. Now, there still has to be a planning meeting, But that planning meeting, whether it's a decision of committee or a delegated decision, cannot revisit the granting of planning permission as being appropriate for development. It can only revisit it if, as it were, either the policy wasn't correctly followed when allocated, or alternatively, it can only revisit the design of the development, not the principle of development. And I base that on the wording of 6.15. Sorry, which has not been the case in this council hitherto. And I don't believe it's been made clear to ward councillors who have a lot of allocated sites in their wards.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. My colleague here, before you answer that, my colleague here, Councillor Lever, wanted to make a point.
Thank you, Chair. And not to answer on behalf of James or Ollie, because I'm sure they've got a much better response. But but I think what I'm gathering from your question, Peter, is that so my understanding is, yes, the allocations are there as an indication of where we would like to see development. It doesn't just give a green light to any development in that place. You still need the policies to make sure the development meets those policies. But yes, it's an indication of where we would like to see development based on the evidence base that James has.
I'm sorry, but that's not what I'm saying. That was the position right up until paragraph 6.15. So the position, my understanding is, up until this paragraph, all that an allocated site meant was that it was available for development should a planning application be made. And the planning application, whether considered by an officer or by planning committee, would determine whether or not the site they wanted to grant in principle development, and the detail of it if it's a full application. Now, the effect of paragraph 6.15 as a matter of law, and I have taken some legal advice on this, the effect of paragraph 615 removes that. So when it comes to the officer's decision or planning committee's decision, it no longer can look at whether or not development is right in principle. That's taken away by the allocation. It can only look at, rather like on a reserve matter, can only look at the design quality, etc. But it can't go undermine the allocation unless there's been some fault in the procedure. And therefore, the principle of development is taken away from the local planning authority to the extent that it's already taken the decision through the allocation process.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I'd like to pass this to officers, which I suspect will be a reasonably brief response. Councillor Fuller, I understand that this has been delegated down to Mr. Brewer.
Yeah, we may tag team. Councillor Spink refers to paragraph 6.15. Obviously, we note from 6.15 there's been no changes to that paragraph, and the summation of the process is correct. That the effect of an allocation as a plan is to allocate that site for development. Obviously, that site still has to go through an application process for a number of different factors and that meets a number of different policies. But the principle of development is considered to be acceptable in that location. There's been no change to that part of the plan, and that is the purpose of a local plan. It is to identify sites where development is considered acceptable in principle. There's obviously still that process to go through in terms of the planning application process. That is the local plan is the only way that sites are allocated in that way. That's how the local plan process works. So I haven't really got anything else to add to that. Ollie, maybe we should come in.
Thank you. And just to expand on that, there could be instances where the council, through the adoption of a local plan, has seen fit to allocate a site. There may, however, be instances, and there will be plenty documented, where a subsequent application is then refused and not necessarily on a point of, should we say, detail, layout, design or something like that. There could still be individual circumstances when an allocation was right at point A in the process. But then when an application was submitted at point B, the planning committee may, if it can justify doing so, arrive at a conclusion that it would be inappropriate to grant planning permission in accordance with the policy. And that is an ability that the planning committee has. But ultimately the point about it is that it is there as a tool to evolve the policy framework forward from what we currently have, which was as a result of the public consultation, that there was greater certainty given at the moment. So if you think of a settlement effectively as a donut, that anything that was immediately adjacent settlement boundary would be acceptable in principle. So that same thing as the allocation, but then working on detail. Whereas what the proposed IPS approach is that moves to hard settlement boundaries, as we've previously termed them, because we were able to do that because we were then providing the certainty through proposing the allocations. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, just say this.
Yeah,
If I-
can we, I'm the chair, aren't I? Yeah, I shouldn't address myself, should I? Not unless I'm looking in a mirror. Thank you, councillor Spink, for that. I think that's probably a reasonably comprehensive response. What I'd like to do, members' questions I've allowed to be extended for some considerable period of time because I think it's important that we answer some of these. However, what I would like to do is move on to the sort of full meat of the meeting, which
Yeah,
has been a little bit delayed.
just
One
make
moment,
a
please.
short comment, please?
One moment, please.
Okay.
So what I would like to do is to take a short break, and then we will move on to the actual DIPS consideration, which will include a short period of time for each member who wishes to put things forward. I have two written comments which I will give the gist to the committee and to officers, which they will be able to take away and consider. And then at that stage, we will then go to the consideration by the committee itself, and obviously recommendations coming out of that. So at this stage, I'd like to suggest that we have a brief break for 5 minutes before we move on. A comfort break for several, a cup of water for others.
Chair,
Thank you.
before we break, please, may I just, so we don't lose the thread of this, because it is what I've been asking about, quite a complicated matter. May I just make a very brief comment as to how we could move on from the situation?
Councillor Spink, if you can make it very, very brief, I'll take it.
Thank you. And that is this, that I don't agree, I'm afraid, as a matter of law, with the advice that's been given by Mr. Brewer or Mr. Bolter. I have taken legal advice on this and agree, but I would ask, please, the committee to consider the correct interpretation when making its recommendations, because if what I believe to be the law is correct, then I think there's a serious flaw in proceeding with the DIPS. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Spink. You can now have a comfort break, please do. You have 5 minutes. So it's 18:13, that means we need to be back by 18:18. minutes along with the responses. Any verbal questions will be summarised in the minutes, but full responses can be found in the recording. That's just to make sure that you understand, as members of the public, as councillors, and as attendees, that you actually know exactly what's happening. Okay, if we move on, I will go through what is intended at this stage so you know the process again. The first thing is that we will very briefly discuss, very briefly give you the process timetable, what happens after this. We will then, I will then go to briefly mention that about the 10 recommendations coming out of full council in October last year. We will then consider very briefly the changes in the draft island planning strategy leading to what we have now. The fourth item is the verbal presentations, which will be limited to 5 minutes from councillors who are present here in person or online. I have had 2 written responses, as I said. I will talk to those very briefly at the beginning of that process, and then we'll move on to scrutiny by committee and recommendations. So if I go to the process timetable, unless I'm much mistaken, it's the 12th of December. It may feel for some people that we've actually been here quite a lot longer, but we haven't yet. On the 11th of January, the Cabinet will receive the Regulation 19 version of the draft island planning strategy and our recommendations, and then they will consider what to do. It will be up to Cabinet as to make that decision. And then on the 17th of January, if they do decide to go ahead, assuming that Father Christmas hasn't delivered exceptional circumstances and 100 million to the Isle of Wight, then full council on the 17th of January will consider, and obviously we will all be back again in this chamber to discuss that. So that is the process to get to the 17th of January. It then proceeds. There is a minimum 6-week period for the submission version of the IPS and accompanying evidence base to be available for further public representation. Under Regulation 22, the submission version of the IPS, together with all the supporting evidence base and all comments, not surprisingly in my copy, all is capitalised. All comments duly made during the Regulation 19 period are formally submitted to the Secretary of State, and then the public examination and independent inspector is appointed by the Planning Inspectorate to carry out an examination in public of the submission version of the IPS. Anyone making comments at the Regulation 19 stage will be able to request to appear at the hearing session. So I think that's about the 14th bite of the cherry that we've probably had on this. The decision on who appears is made solely by the appointed planning inspector. And then obviously the planning inspectorate will publish that eventually. That is the process. The council response to the 10 recommendations from the past full council appear in the documents for this meeting, which were published, I believe, last Monday. That's the 4th of December. And they include all 10. We then move on to the changes to the draft island plan strategy, which also appear in documentation. And they actually specifically refer to, I believe, 3 of the recommendations which have led to substantive changes to the draft island planning strategy. At this stage, we can then go to questions from the committee members, whether they want to comment or ask questions regarding the response to those 10 recommendations or to the changes to the DIPS documentation that we have. And I will go round in turn, starting with Councillor Lever as vice chair. Would you like to make any comments on those two things?
Not at this moment.
Thank you. Councillor Beston?
No, Chair, I don't have any specific questions to those responses.
Councillor Quirk?
I think the changes to reflect what was in the motion, so I agree with that. There are a couple of things I would like to raise with it, though.
I can assure the committee that they will be given full opportunities to ask additional questions. And then obviously we will then go to recommendations. If there are any, it could be that we just simply want everything to go through as is, or possibly not. That means that we now go to the presentations from other councillors. And as I said, I will just go through the two written ones which I've had. First of all, from Councillor Lilly. This was such a substantial piece of work by Councillor Lilly that I've had a discussion with the planning officer, and they have agreed that they will consider their response to that and respond directly to Councillor Lilly, who will deal with that response as he sees fit. The second one is from Councillor Garrett, and he just wanted to confirm the policy itself, and we're getting into the detail here. So if you have a very large piece of paper in front of you, a set of papers in front of you, or more likely some of the more modern people among us just simply online, the policy in respect of Parkhurst and Honeyhill indicates at least 750 homes for the former Camp Hill site, and that's on page 96 and 97 of the DIPS. And then at page 167, the figure of 750 has been replaced with 345. I believe, from what Councillor Garrett is saying, that the correct reference, the consistency is to the last figure, 345. If I could pass that to Councillor Fuller, who I would assume would pass it down the line.
I certainly will, Chairman. Thank you.
To the end to me. Yeah, so the proposed allocation at former Camp Hill is for 750, but the number of homes expected to come forward in the plan period is the second figure, which is the 375, I think, which is the figure referred to. So obviously the trajectory of that site is considered to be at the back end of the plan period.
Thank you for that. I have a figure written down of 345, but
I'm just moving to the next bit.
the figure is 345.
Correct. It is.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, he also would like to see the policies map to ensure that the intention is, whether the intention is still to take the boundary as close to, as before, to the edge of the forest. I suspect that's something which you might want to consider separately. And actually it's something which I may wish to reference myself at a later time. He's also mentioned aspects of traffic responses, traffic changes to traffic junctions and the like, and wanted to ensure that the draft island, that the island plan strategy actually had strong push on the provision of substantive information to ensure that traffic management was a key part of particularly Horsebridge Hill. Okay. He's mentioned a number of other points which he will be raising separately, I suspect. Now that is the end of the written queries that I've had from councillors. So I would now like to offer the floor to any councillor who wants to take advantage of their 5 minutes. I can see some councillors here who might very well wish to do that. Members of the committee, can I just point out that actually you can do that if you wish, but you can just wait for the committee's scrutiny. You obviously, as members of this committee, have substantive time to put forward your questions and queries. So if I could, sorry, one moment. Councillor Quirk, you have a query.
One of mine is parochial about the bay, so I think it's appropriate to do it here. And other comments are more general, but that's more appropriate to do in the total debate.
I'm happy either way. So I would suggest that in this particular circumstance, it might be best if you put all of yours at once, parochial or otherwise, because some of mine are quite parochial. Okay, but thank you for that. I understand that I saw Councillor Adams waving his hand around frantically first of all, so I'd like to offer the floor to him for 5 minutes.
Thank you for that, Chair. Could I respectfully ask, please, with regarding your response to Michael Lilly's question, I see that today and read it, and it is very detailed. And I feel it's very important, particularly to councillors in my own area, in the north east of the White. But could I respectfully request, please, that the reply is copied to all councillors, in particular to those in the north east White, if it goes nowhere else, because that's very important, and there's very many relevant matters and concerns to those councillors and the residents of that ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Yes, I agree. It is very substantial. Councillor Fuller, could you confirm that that response will be circulated to all councillors?
Absolutely. I think I said earlier on, anything that has been written for this meeting should be open and transparent for members of the public to see. So I would anticipate that the answers to Councillor Lilly's question, so long as he's happy to do that, and I'm sure he would be, is circulated to all councillors. Thank you. With other questions as well. I think at the end of the day, full council are going to make a final decision on the dips, and I think it's only right and proper that those questions have been properly answered by officers. Thank you.
Grateful for that. Councillor Adams, do you have any additional points you wish to make at this stage? All right. I would like to invite Councillor Jarman or Councillor Spink to speak. Who would like to go first?
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jarman, you have 5 minutes.
Before I do that, just one question is, at what point, because I asked the question and had a written reply, at what point in the meeting are we addressing the 10 issues that were referred by full council? I was told they would be dealt with individually at this meeting.
Those 10 items are part of the papers. The response to those are part of the papers within the council agenda.
Are we coming on to those later and dealing with them individually?
No, we are not, because they've been dealt with individually within the documentation. And I wasn't planning to ask the the officers of the council any further questions on that. Those responses are there. The responses have led to some changes in the draft island plan strategy, and the changes have also been documented. If you wish to consider any of those at this stage, feel free, but I see no reason to take it any further. We have answers to those recommendations at full council. Assuming that this goes to full council, then obviously those recommendations can be considered. The panel itself, the committee itself, can consider those recommendations and responses to those to consider whether there are any recommendations coming out of this particular meeting which may add or just follow what's already been recommended.
I only had questions on 8 of the 10 points ready to raise whenever we were doing them individually, as I was told would be done. But if that's not to be the case, I'm not too sure what to do with those queries on the 8th point.
I would ask Councillor Fuller to consider a response to that. I think it's perfectly reasonable that you come up with a response, please.
Yes, I think as you said, that those 10 questions have been put into the body of the report. Just wanted to ask Councillor Jarman whether he's seen those responses, and if he has he got any concerns regarding the way that they've been responded to? Because I'm quite happy to take those away and make sure that you get further clarification
Yes, well, my questions on 8 of them refer to the responses which are in the document. Which is why I asked at what point they would be dealt with, and I was told individually. So, but I'm getting the idea that we're not dealing with them today, and we're going to defer that to some other event, or they should be submitted subsequently in writing, or I'm not sure.
There's only so much time I can allocate to individual queries. So I think what we should do is, if you have queries on those particular things, then you should submit those to the council and cabinet, who will then consider those. What I'm looking for at this stage is basically any additional comments or questions that you might have.
Right, so I'll ask my question then.
Okay.
The best thing.
So moving back to that, over
I'll-
to you, councillor Spink.
No, so I'll take my questions on those 8 and add it to the ones which the parish and the residents groups are drafting. It's probably better to incorporate them rather than doubling them up. So my question is, Freshwater, Totland and Cornwall have seen very significant housing development over the past decade, which has corresponded to a very dramatic increase in sewage eruptions, back up into homes, and very frequent discharges of sewage into the River Yar at Totland Bay and Cornwall Bay. These areas lie at the extreme end of the sewage network and a long way from our island treatment works. As a result, and based on local input, our parishes and residents all supported retaining the existing development boundaries as hard without including adjacent sites. At the same time, limiting new houses until the infrastructure is upgraded and concentrating instead on bringing forward extant sites and renovating existing buildings to provide much needed and exclusively low cost rentals. These inputs have been repeatedly, forcefully and passionately made, with videos of sewage flowing down our streets and fountains of sewage on Cornwall Common, with gulls feasting on the effluent. I'm sure we've all seen them. These appear to have been ignored in this new DIPS. Instead, Freshwater is allocated a further 252 homes. Why is that? And will this committee now recommend revising this new DIPS to include full acceptance of the Freshwater Parish and residence limits regarding new houses and boundaries?
Thank you, councillor Jarman. Councillor Fuller, would the planning department like to make comment on the extent question on that?
I would refer this to Mr. Brewer, but I would add that one of the things that did come through loudly and clearly over the last few months was the need for a policy that looked at infrastructure. That is an important policy that has been added to the draft island plan. I'm going to refer to Mr. Brewer, who I'm sure can add a lot more than I can, but I think some of the issues that you've referred to, and I can understand to them, are quite important. But Mr. Brewer.
Thank you, and I'll just provide some comments. There was a part of the question around settlement boundaries and keeping them as they are, as hard. Obviously, we have the current situation at the moment where any site immediately adjacent to the settlement boundary has supporting principles for development. Obviously, the IPS takes a different approach to that, includes those allocations within the settlement boundaries, but changes those boundaries to hard. So it kind of takes a step forward whilst appreciating that there is a need to allocate sites across the island. So that's the approach taken within the plan.
Sorry to interrupt, but that was not the question. The question was, we wanted them retained, the existing boundaries of hard, not including adjacent sites.
So
I understand the process, and it's not relevant to
the current boundaries are not hard, just to be explicit. The current boundaries as set out in SP1, any site immediately adjacent to settlement boundary,
Yeah.
the principle of development is acceptable. That's the
But
current
that was my point.
situations.
We
SP1.
wanted them made
Sorry, I'm
hard.
still talking. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
The current boundary
Gentlemen,
in SP1.
sorry,
site-
Mr. Brewer, can I
Sorry.
just add something here? Councillor Jarman, it is polite to allow the officer to make a comprehensive response. If there is something else you wish to add, that is entirely reasonable. And I quite understand the concerns over sewage. Believe me, I've seen it in my ward and other people have as well. So I understand your concerns, but I think it would be reasonable to allow the officer to finish.
My apologies to you and to the officer concerned. I was just trying to focus on the key issue of the question.
I was just to start again, so I was just setting the context in terms of the current situation we've got with the settlement boundary, where sites immediately adjacent are acceptable in principle. The IPS takes the approach that that development boundary comes hard, but includes allocations. It is accepted that a number of comments were made from across the island, including places such as Freshwater, Tottenham, Yarmouth, that those allocations should not be made. However, the plan is being written in the context of the government and the government's desire to see 300,000 homes a year. Also, obviously, what we're trying to do in the plan is have a realistic island housing number within that plan. So that is a reduction from the standard method of 38%. But equally, we're also trying to look at development across the island and how can we best deliver affordable homes on the island. So obviously, at the moment, as is in the current core strategy and in the IPS, sites of under 10 units do not deliver any affordable housing. So therefore, if brownfield development sites come forward of less than 10 units, there is no requirement for those sites to deliver affordable housing. So if we were required solely on small brownfield sites in those settlements, they would not provide any affordable housing, unless, of course, the landowner potentially was a philanthropist and wanted to do that off the goodwill of their heart, which they may well do. So that's the situation in terms of that. It's fully accepted that the comments made in the Reg 18 stage may not have been taken into account, and the reasons for that was set out in the summary of reps, which has been on the website now for about 18 months, but obviously has been referred to tonight already. If the comments are still there, that people feel that is not the right approach, then the Reg 19 consultation offers the opportunity for those comments to be made and to be considered by the planning inspector rather than the planning department of the council. And just, I guess, in terms of the point about sewage, obviously a very hot topic, is in the news a lot. And I guess there's a couple of things to say on that. One is, as we've already referred to tonight, policies in the plan are looking in a great detail about that separation of foul and surface water. So making sure surface water doesn't go into the combined system to take water out. So therefore, in those heavy rainfall events, there is more capacity in the system to handle the foul that's in there. And that's obviously written into policy, and changes have been made to the policies to appreciate that. And obviously, we also have the ongoing issue, and the issue of sewage is controlled by other regulatory regimes as well. So the EA through permitting at wastewater treatment works, and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act now has in as legislation a requirement for the water companies to take account of development at their water treatment works through permitting with the EA by 2030. So that's coming, that's in legislation through the LURA, and that is something that obviously is handled by a regime outside of planning, but is now part of legislation. I think I've covered all the points that were made, but obviously Councillor Joel may come back if he doesn't think I have.
Okay, Mr. Brose, thank you very much for taking the time to answer that. It's very difficult sometimes when you're sitting here as opposed to sitting in full council, not to shout and scream, because certainly the sewage issue, as Councillor Jarman has mentioned, is a major topic and is a major problem, and is something which my 25 odd questions, which I won't be all asking, I promise, partly refers to. At this stage, I'd like to go back to Councillor Jarman and ask, would he like to add anything further?
I just, everything I've heard I already knew. I knew what the process was. I knew what was proposed about the boundaries. What I didn't get an answer to is the why, and will this committee, which is the question I asked specifically at the end, will this committee now recommend, because this committee can make recommendations going forward, and I think it's the only one I've heard made this evening so far, will this committee now recommend that the new DIPS as presented to us includes full acceptance of the freshwater parish and residence limits regarding new houses and boundaries? That means fixing the boundaries as hard where they are and not including adjacent sites. That was a specific reply made by the parishes as a plea to try and limit the problems that we have with infrastructure, and in particular the eruptions of sewage in the near future.
Councillor Jarman, that's very helpful, thank you. I think it's fair to say that the committee will consider everything put before it, which is the intention, and then we will make what we feel is the recommendations as appropriate to Cabinet. We've taken what you said on board, certainly, I've certainly heard everything that you've said, and we will deal with it in due course. I'd now like to pass to Councillor Spin. You have the closest to 5 minutes that we can manage.
Thank you. I don't think I'll be 5 minutes because most of that which I would like to say, I've really asked through questions in any event. So it's just really a question of just amplifying those slightly. We are unfortunately, and this is following on from Councillor Jarman's point, we are unfortunately witnessing torrential rain, unprecedented rainfalls, which in turn, I think, have led to unprecedented flooding and unprecedented sewage discharges. I know that everybody regrets that and wants to try and find the best solution. But residents that I've been talking to are in disbelief, if I may say so, that the plan, the draft plan, is still being proceeded with without considering the specific problems that have arisen, or at least trying to determine what the specific problems are. So given that the DIPS allocates where development will take place in the main, and given that the DIPS, in addition, determines the amount of development, is it not sensible, I don't ask this for an answer, but as a rhetorical question, that the DIPS should at least be paused to consider whether allocated sites are likely to worsen or improve the current situation? I'll give you one example, if I may, and that is Westridge or Westacre Park. Now, there's been comments by the public, which may be right or may not be, that the 90 odd houses that already exist on Westacre Park have caused flooding into the gardens because the land is higher and the flooding goes into the gardens below. They have said that in this increasing rainfalls, that it's got worse and it streams down from Westacre. Now, it seems unlikely, for example, that another 500 houses or thereabouts, which is in the allocated plan, is going to improve that situation. Should we be looking at whether or not, for example, allocated sites should be taken out of the plan and looked at again in light of these unprecedented storm discharges? As I've said, residents that I've spoken to are in disbelief that when they are saddled with flooding and saddled with sewage, that we're banging on with 500 houses more per year for them. My second point is that in many areas of the Isle of Wight, demographic imbalance is a real problem. And for example, in Yarmouth and Freshwater, they're having problems now fulfilling the jobs that young people would normally do. And it's statistically accepted that the majority, or at least a significant proportion, I mustn't overstate it, a very significant proportion which is expected to increase of our population growth is in the over 65 sector, and mainly retirees from the mainland. This DIPS does very little to prevent that imbalance continuing. And areas, for example, like, as I've said, Yarmouth, can't fill, I should say, the jobs that are needed. For example, the fire brigade can't recruit young people. Moving on, I've dealt already with allocated sites. I have sent to every member, all those present on the committee, a legal definition of allocated sites, because it's somewhat difficult. I do hope that you'll consider that and maybe consider it in this meeting, because it does change the law in my respectful submission. I don't wish to go over it in any more detail. Housing numbers, I stand by my stance that 453 is far too high. We won't be able to build that number. And unless the MPPF bans the tilted balance, and who knows what the MPPF is going to do, we will be back into the tilted balance as fast as you can say Jack Robinson. So that is of great concern. There is no evidence to show that 453 houses is deliverable. The KC's advice, which has been referred to, my understanding was in fact a QC's advice, because it was so long ago and was prior to the economic downturn. So we are setting the island up to fail, in my view. And with regard to the housing crisis, this may not be a matter for this committee, but it has been said that putting a policy of building social housing on council-owned land is a matter for the Alliance. And if the Alliance wants it, it can go into the draft plan. I would say that if the Alliance is serious about solving the housing crisis, and I have to say I have a large question mark over that.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. That there should be a policy of retaining council-owned land for social housing, and we must stop selling it off to undisclosed individuals for undisclosed amounts. And I'm shocked that such a policy is not in the DIPS at the request of the Alliance. Those are I'm sorry, I took my 5 minutes, but there it is. That's it. Thank you.
I suspect we've probably given you a bit more than 5 minutes, because I always like listening to your rhetorical analysis of what's going on. I think we've taken those on board. I think, in fact, I'm absolutely certain that much of what you've said has been addressed by the officers, so I see no point in trying to reiterate that. However, I understand that Mr. Fuller would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Certainly one of the reasons that we are chomping at the bit with the island planning strategy is because the island planning strategy actually does have policies to mitigate against flooding. We have policies that mitigate coastal erosion. If Councillor Spink would like to look at policies EB15, which is the Monkton Mead catchment area policy. Again, work needs to be done with any development in the Ryde area to ensure that the catchment area of Monkton Mead is properly safeguarded. That is a policy that does not exist currently in the draft strategy or the Iron Core strategy that's being used at the moment. So those policies are embedded in there, and I think the incidents that we've seen in the last few days and weeks demonstrates the need to have these updated policies, because again, when the last plan was written, it was some time ago. I think the world has changed very much since 2012. I think work started on the draft, the island planning strategy back in 2006. So it is old, it's out of date. And what we're trying to do is future-proof our housing to make sure that that is good for the people to move into. And I think the problem that you've mentioned about problems that there are in Ryde about flooding. Well, again, we didn't use the draft island planning strategy when we determined those planning applications. We used old policies. What we're trying to do is sharpen the tools that we've got in our toolbox to make sure that it's resilient to some of the changes that we're seeing in the future.
Thank you for that. Gentlemen, I would like to thank councillors who have taken the time and effort to attend here, and others who've made points for this committee to consider. It is very important that we actually take note of what other people consider, and recognise that there is always a balance. I've yet to hear really today the key issue for housing, which I've been banging on about since I got elected last November, which is how do we house the people on this island? And I've not heard anything about this particular policy, objections or otherwise, that actually seems to address that directly. There is a real problem there. The second thing I want to say before I hand over to everybody else, and I'm taking chairman's prerogative on this, is actually things have changed. The recent weather of the last few months has been unprecedented in scientific terms, in terms of the island, and in terms of the effect that it has had on individual authorities, individual wards, and all of us will have seen that. I was mentioning earlier on that the rural areas that I represent have been hit badly and continue to be hit badly. And because they're quite resilient individually, much of the time you don't hear about that. It is worthwhile making the very clear point, and I suspect that we may consider that as a recommendation, that the DIPS is considered, the Cabinet looks at the DIPS and considers whether there is a possibility to improve the approach to flooding prevention and to the responses to any flooding later on. I know that there is a Section 19 review of flooding going on as we speak, for which we are very grateful, but nonetheless, there are issues to be faced. I will be quiet now. It happens occasionally, Councillor Lever. I would like to go round the committee and ask for their thoughts and recommendations. There is little doubt that there are a number of questions which we can ask about the DIPS. I will hold mine back. If we start running out of time, then I will say less. I'd like to start by asking Councillor Beston, because I know he has questions, to put those forward.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have several observations and questions. The majority is aimed at policy, and there is one there for planning. And it's to do with information and additional policy to be provided. So my first question, and I'll give the page number and section number. So section EV14, which is quite relevant to the discussion we just had. Section EV14 on page 72 of the hard copy, and that's headed Managing Flood Risk in New Development, and that's under item D, provide appropriate on-site sustainable drainage systems for the disposal of surface water, SUDS. Now, when reading from there onto page 73, section 4.106, it refers to the IOW local flood risk management strategy. Now, although this document is relevant, it is dated July 2016, and it actually provides no in-depth explanation into the SUDS. The other document listed is the IOW Strategic Flood Risk Assessment at the bottom of page 73. Now that does give more specific information relating to SUDS. So my question is, would it be possible to provide the exact document link to the fact sheets at the bottom of page 73 and include that into section 1.15 on page 28? I'll go on to the second question, which is not dissimilar, and that relates to, I'll only do two at this point, Chair, if that's okay with you. Go on to section EV15 on page 74 and 75, and that refers to groundwater runoff, sewerage and sustainable drainage systems again, and it actually refers to the government publication of technical guidance to the MPPF. Now, there is very little information on this contained within that document, though there is a hefty 599-page document of the SUDS manual publication C697 that covers this in depth. Again, my question is, could this also be included in section 1.15 on page 28?
Well, can I suggest that one of the planning team provides a response to those two?
I think it would be useful to provide it in writing. Again, I'm just wondering whether a quick summary could be given by Mr. Brewer. Mr. Brewer, as members will realise, is also the council's flood lead as well. Well, no, Tash is, but again, Mr. Brewer is experienced dealing with flooding matters.
If
James.
possible, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Beston rightly refers to the dreamy read of the 599-page SUD SERA manual. If you are struggling to sleep, I highly recommend it. It's there, but no, absolutely, we can include reference to it. And probably what we haven't referred to in the IPS, which the committee may wish to think about in terms of recommendation, is that we have commissioned JBA to produce a draft SUDS supplementary planning document. So that has been prepared as in draft, and we're looking to go out to consultation early part of next year on that, and hopefully get that adopted way in advance of the IPS. So obviously that document has a lot of information, and then we get out to public consultation in terms of what SUDs are, how they can be incorporated in new development, and provide some very specific guidance on that particular topic. So we'd be able to use that early, but also we could, of course, include reference to it in here because it will provide that backup guidance, if you like, in terms of SUDs and how important they are and the role that they play. Hopefully that covers off the 2 points I think you've made.
Councillor Lever?
Sorry, just to follow on from that point, Councillor Beston mentioned the local flood risk management strategy. That's going through an update now. So maybe could we see a draft of that in its current form so we get an idea of what will be adopted?
Yeah, absolutely. So Councillor was absolutely correct. We've also got a new draft of the local flood risk management strategy as well. So that's been bouncing around some of the risk management authorities. And the next stage of that is to do some consultation on that document as well. So absolutely that will be out into the public realm. And again, that can be referred to, and that will update the one that Councillor Beston referred to from 2016. Obviously, we've just taken a pause on that process at the moment because of the events that happened, obviously October, November. So we want to make sure that flood risk management strategy fully appreciates what did happen and whether we need to make any changes to that draft before we go out to the public with it, before we then take it forward. So absolutely that's being updated as well.
If I may, Chair, just add on to that, as Councillor Fuller highlighted, we do have the benefit of James wearing a number of different hats and being involved in several things. And I think what we've started to see through the work that's been done on the draft island planning strategy to date, which is in part driven by the consultation responses we've already received, and unfortunately more recent and even historic weather, is a significant effort to ramp up the approach when we, from a planning policy perspective, when we think about how we can best manage and also mitigate against flood risk. So as James has outlined, there's several elements here, and land use planning policy is one of those things. And what we're able to do, and linking back into the LFMS and all the Section 19 stuff, is make sure that there is that basically that coherent read across through those different aspects, so that we're looking at flood risk management and mitigation in a holistic way, which we haven't really been able to do up to this point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Beston, would you like to proceed?
So there is just one small other observation on page 74, just going back one. section 4.112, and that's headed Raise Awareness and Enforcement of Paving Front Gardens. Now, this is referred to in the RIDE Surface Water Management Plan, but the IOW Planning Enforcement Policy makes no reference on enforcement paving over front gardens. So, of course, this may be enforced through building control. Now, there is specific guidance on this contained within the government paper, Permeable Surfacing of Front Gardens, published in May 2009. So again, my question is, could a specific link be provided on this at the bottom of page 75 and included under item 1.15 on page 28 again?
Councillor Fuller, I understand that you're passing this down the line to an unexpected Mr. Brewer.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Absolutely, Councillor Beston is right. In paving over front gardens is a particular issue in lots of different places on the island. We do have a distinct section on that particular topic in the SUDS SPD, just around how the impact of it can have. And we've tried to be, you'll see when the document comes out, as simple as possible and equate it to the amount of bathtubs of water that it might, in an hour, might come off a driveway and go into the combined sewer. And if you have it permeable, that's the amount of water you're taking out. So I'm trying to make it as easy to understand as possible. But absolutely, one of the things we can certainly do is to dial up the reference to that in here and make more specific reference to it. If the committee wants to make that recommendation, it's absolutely not a problem at all. And again, that feeds through then from Island Plan into SUDS SPD, flood risk management strategy, so everything's saying the same kind of thing. And I guess just on the point of enforcement, sometimes it's planning, it's not what's definitely said, but what's not said. And just because it doesn't specifically say we would enforce on that particular topic, we will of course enforce on that particular topic. We have the ability to do it under our enforcement powers if that is something that's raised to us and we can investigate it.
Shall I carry on, Chair?
Please, Councillor Beston.
Okay. So section G5 on page 112, headed ensuring planning permissions are granted. It's probably directed at Ollie. Items B, C and D, and as far as I can read, my assumption is will require additional resource from the LPA. So my question is again, how will the LPA, the council's legal team, manage additional workload when drawing up either legal agreement clauses, additional reviews on site delivery, and using compulsory purchase powers, etc.?
Councillor Fuller and presume Mr. Brewer.
I'm going to hand over at this point to Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Yes, there is no doubt, Councillor Beston, that bringing a new toolbox with a new set of tools, as it might be described, will have an implication for the LPA and its operation. There is, as I very much see it, a real opportunity with a new plan and new policies to recalibrate and manage those appropriately. We are already having conversations with colleagues in legal about how that might look, and indeed some of the work we've already been doing through our enforcement strategy is strengthening the need for those conversations about additional capacity, because what we're seeing, and as I know you'll appreciate, is that whilst obviously the LPA will be the main body responsible for determining planning applications, it obviously works in partnership with a range of other services across the council, bringing in experts and taking advice, and legal undoubtedly play a key role in doing that. So that's something that we're very mindful of, and we'll be working on, obviously, those, as I've said, those conversations have started, but they will need to ramp up should the IPS be progressed through the different stages. I think we'd also just highlight on that point, and given draft wording of policy G5, that gives us a bit more, I suppose we could describe it as a bit more bite to accompany a bark, with some, I think, as I would certainly see it, welcome opportunities provided by the LURA, which I'm sure councillors will have seen is reflected in the additional text below the point. So I'm sure that's something that we'll all be very keen to see develop and implemented as we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Councillor Beston, would you like to proceed, please?
Certainly. Where are we? So just going back to so also contained with item D, it mentions require evidence to demonstrate different housing products on a site where it can compete in the market at the same time in the same location to maximise delivery. So my brief question is, does that refer to modular housing units?
Councillor Fuller, I know that you like modular housing discussions.
Well, yeah, housing's no longer my portfolio. I don't know whether James wants to answer that, but we do have our housing officer here as well. So I'll ask James to come in on the policy matters, but perhaps Miss Lang will want to deal with anything further in accordance with affordable housing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. So just in response to that point directly, so it doesn't refer directly to modular housing. When we're talking about affordable housing products there, it's around tenure. So private market housing, shared ownership, affordable rented, social rented, all the different first homes, all the different types of tenure you can have on a site. And that point is around making sure that if you're bringing a site forward, you're perhaps not, are you bringing forward a range of products or different products on that site which will be built and then sold, rather than potentially if you've already got a number of type of products in a particular area and they're not selling and you're bringing forward the same thing, then actually are you just building houses that aren't getting occupied? So that's what that point's around, to make sure that sites come forward, get built and get occupied, rather than that. However, the point around modular housing and as a type of development, you know, a type of housing product, type of housing design, if you like, is really good. And absolutely, it could be one that we seek to weave into perhaps our design policy C1 or the housing section, just to make explicit reference to it as a type of housing design that could come forward and would be supported.
Thank you. So just a supplementary on that then. So when we mention modular housing or talk about modular housing, again, it is contained within the Regen strategy that's dated June 2019. And it says develop an appropriate partnership or partnerships with affordable housing providers or modular manufacturers to deliver 100 to 200 affordable homes per year. So again, could there be some additional reference to that included into section 7, which is the housing section from page 150 onwards?
Not sure who's going to answer this, so rather than having another pause, shall we pass on to Councillor Fuller, who will direct it accordingly?
I think this is one that is Mr. Brewer's bag again, and yes, James.
The short answer is yes, absolutely. We can certainly include reference to that. Again, more of a generic type of housing that could come forward, rather than perhaps pigeonholing it to a particular site or a particular area. or a particular number, because obviously modular housing is potentially of its time. It may not be, we don't know, but certainly something we can refer to as something that could be supported. Yeah.
And my final question, observation, section E8 on a page 158, supporting high quality tourism. Now, I searched and searched and searched for an explanation on 3 words. So under item F, it mentions the core tourist, 4 words, I beg your pardon. It mentions the core tourist accommodation areas as shown on the policies map. Now, the core tourist accommodation areas are mentioned several times within the draft IPS, but it makes no link to the policies map itself. There is no further information contained within the IW Regeneration Strategy 2019. So again, my question is, where can the core tourist accommodation areas be found within the IPS document? I can't find it.
I'm going to divert that to the champion of who wrote the policy mainly. So Councillor Mr. Brewer will respond to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. So, yeah, the draft policies map, which is on the website, and happy to circulate the link round, obviously to members, has that layer on there which shows the core tourist accommodation areas, which are focused in Sandown and Shanklin. They're the 2 main areas. So, again, happy to send that round so you can see where those are. So the reference to them in the plan and the effectively the line where they are on the plan.
It's worth mentioning here that actually our meeting on the 4th of January will actually specifically focus on the visitor economy, and part of that would be accommodation itself. So it might be that additional material could come forward to the next meeting as well. But important to raise that as part of the possible island plan strategy. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. The map that is being referred to by Mr. Brewer, I think, is a very, very good map. It just doesn't show the core tourism areas. It shows virtually everything. It's a very, very good interactive map. It shows where all the local woodland sites are, all the SSSIs, areas that are protected. And I think that map is very, very good. Unfortunately, I think it would help all councillors if they could have access to the link to that map, because it is a useful tool to use, not only with the dips, but also generally with what we're doing as a council to protect our island.
Thank you. I totally agree.
Thank you, Councillor Beston. That is an enormous amount of work, quite clearly, and I'm very grateful for all of those questions. And I think we're starting to get some recommendations going forward, possibly. Have you got any more at this stage, or that's fine? Then I'd like to move on to my colleague, Councillor Quirk, for his considerations.
Going into the section on the economy and tourism, on page 362, E10 Sandown Bay Tourism Opportunity Area. In the wide tourism opportunity zone, it links it to the local plan. The Bay Regeneration Plan is complete now. It will be going to consultation in the new year, and I think it will be very good to incorporate into E10 that any development of sites will be consistent, should be consistent with the Bay Regeneration Plan.
I think that's a very clear recommendation. Just in case there's any comments, are there any comments, Councillor?
I have no comments, but I don't know whether you have any, James.
Just very quickly, absolutely, really sensible, and then mirrors the approach taken in Royd, obviously, where they've got the place plan in place already. So we can do that, and I think it links into policy C15 as well, where we set out that actually going through that place plan approach, obviously is of benefit to local community because it allows us to link into other policies. So absolutely.
A second sort of detail within that, one of the key potential regeneration opportunities is the site between Dinosaur Isle and the Wild Heart Trust. That's sort of the Browns area and the land behind that, because it's a much bigger site than on its grounds. And that probably needs to have a strategy about the development of the whole site, rather than just a piecemeal, someone wants to do something here, someone wants to do something there, because if you agree to someone doing something in one part, you potentially make it impossible to do something with the other part. So I think there needs to be a strategy. The Bay Plan will set out principles. It won't set out, we want to do this, this and this. So I think that following on from the Bay Plan, there does need to be a strategy for how that area is developed to actually deliver a tourism opportunity.
Councillor Jones Evans.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been very quiet for the past 2 hours, but 2.5 almost now. But yeah, no, I just wanted to pick up on that. Of course, Councillor Quirk and others were in the room today. Were at the last session we had at the Truvor Hotel in April, I think it was. And I know part of our group, Mr. Brewer was part of the group that I was in, and bringing together all of the different uses and allocations for that area is quite important, and which James already, Mr. Brewer has already offered to do. It's a very, very complex area. It has several designations, and as anyone who's driven over the Downs recently will see, could actually double as a swimming pool at the moment. So it again, it's a site that needs careful consideration, you know, as many other sites on the island. And getting back to the place plan, it's really, really important the place plans are mentioned. We have obviously got Ryde, Newport, Cowes and Northwood, and well, the Bay one, which will be, as we said, public very soon. But there's also you know, hopefully during the lifetime of the plan, the other areas of the Isle of Wight that currently don't have will have their own place plan. So I'm hoping just by, you know, default they will get included as they go along. Maybe SPDs or whatever is the most beneficial vehicle really, that the local voice gets heard.
Councillor Jones Evans, that's actually really helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you. There are policies within the plan that also references place plans and neighbourhood plans and their importance when shaping local communities. I think Mr. Bolter also has something he wishes to sort of like say concerning this also. But thank you very much for the question, Chris. I think it's very relevant.
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. And I think I'd just like to, I suppose, pull together some of the information that you've just had from Councillor Fuller and Councillor Jones Evans, and just reflect on that from a local plan preparation and land use perspective. As I'm sure everyone will appreciate, there's often an awful lot of moving parts, aren't there, on any given site, particularly when there's high community investment and interest in it, potentially a range of competing different landowners, etc., etc. What we've tried to do through the plan is to help facilitate something, but to be perfectly honest, not knowing what that something would be at the time of preparation. So we're trying to do our bit, if you like, from the land use perspective by identifying the opportunity area and providing some of what we would consider to be the main planning considerations for that. What that could evolve into in the future, I think, will depend heavily on what comes through on the place plan. And as James has already highlighted, one of the key things that we're really keen and trying to do through the draft IPS is really give a greater level of prominence to these community-led approaches and plans that may not always be formal planning documents, but clearly have a place in the formal planning process. So hopefully there will be some comfort to you, Councillor Quirk, that I think that the approach that he's been talking about is embedded in the draft IPS at the moment, and that provides then the opportunity for further expansion, potentially through further either dedicated supplementary planning document, council-led, or indeed the local-led place plan, or something in between, development briefs, etc. But that, no matter what that looks like, that's an approach that the draft policies of the plan would be in support of. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bolter. Councillor Quirk.
Just a supplementary comment on that one. The Bay Place plan is complete. It will be going to consultation in January, but it's Christmas is in the way. But there, so it's the wide one references the local plan. There will be a local plan probably actually before this plan gets approved. So I think reference to, it may be not specific, but to any local place plan should be in that section. Next one, it's not a change, but new homes in the countryside. There's not too much countryside in my ward, but there's a bit of it. But on page 331, you've changed some of the wording, and I'm not going to talk about the bit you've changed. I'm happy with that. But E seems to be that we're saying no one can build in on greenfield sites apart from film stars and lottery winners and industrialists who can afford really expensive buildings. I don't know why that one's there. It seems incongruous.
Sorry, for the benefit of ignoramuses like myself, could I just clarify exactly which section you're looking at? I think I've got different page numbers. I apologize. Is that? Councillor Fuller, could you give us some thoughts on that?
I'm still on policy C15, which is looking at place plans, and I just wanted to show off and tell you that I knew what the policy was. But if you're asking me to delve a little bit deeper, I'm going to ask Mr. Brewer to give a full response, because I think the wording, it's important that we get the wording right, and I'm sure Mr. Brewer may have a response.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just so that point there effectively reflects paragraph 55 of the NPPF, which does allow homes of exceptional quality of architectural designs come forward if they are of such stunning nature. So you may often, because you're probably not as sad as me and read the planning process all the time, but you'll see architects championing the fact they've got a paragraph 55 home through, because it's where home is of such exceptional design quality that it kind of overrides everything else. So that's what that point refers to. That's in the NPPF. And so that's why that last bullet is there. I don't think off the top of my head we've actually had any that I can recall on the island, but it's there just to reflect that point in the NPPF that is a way a home could come forward. But
that's very helpful. Can I just confirm they're not affordable then?
That would depend on who's building it, I guess, wouldn't it?
Councillor Quirk.
Usually when we're in this situation, you get all the complaints and sort of people don't like this, don't like that. I like to say I'm very supportive of the policies that are relating to actually building out developments. One of the big problems we have on the island and have had for years is developers, usually off-island developers, who take large sites, get planning permission and sit on them for years, or start to build and never finish. You know, the penny feathers of this world, the Barrett homes, you know, still not finished after 10 years. So I think that's a really important set of policies, and I'm totally support that and endorse that. And actually, the quality of the plan, whilst everyone will have little bits of the plan that they don't like, I think the effort that's gone into this and the quality of what's come out is very, very good. And I would just like to thank officers in general, but James in particular, for all of the work.
I'm not sure that's a motion, but I'd second that one.
I would like to pick up with what was said about the sewage and the water, the flooding issue. In the policy, yes, it now says that you've got to separate the grey water from the sewage, which is a move in the right direction. But we've got a whole island's worth of historic development that doesn't do that. And I think we need to encourage looking at this, and maybe a resolution that says that this committee encourages Cabinet to review the issues raised by local town and parish councils with particular reference to the issues of flooding and sewage capacity. I think something along those lines is be worth coming to this committee.
I think that's worth considering, certainly as a recommendation for us coming out of today. Right, moving on, I'd like to call upon Councillor Lever at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. I've got nothing to delve into myself, but I thought I'd just touch on a couple of points that people have raised. A lot of Councillor Beston's questions. Are we looking to make recommendations on the back of those? Yeah. I just want to double check because I'm not 100% sure from how Councillor Beston worded them, but obviously there was reference to external policy that's not in the DIPS. I don't know how else to describe that. I just want to make sure that we retain the right level of detail in the DIPS so that that we're not pulling in for detail out of those policies and putting them into the DIPS itself. So, because I just want to make sure that going forward, if we need to update detail in those external policies, that we're not then having to rebuild the house that they sit in. So I'd much rather keep that detail external to those policies. Just want to double check that that's, yeah.
Councillor Fuller, it's quite a detailed thing. I think you might be.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Yes, Councillor Lever, that's I suppose we'd probably describe it as one of the sort of core principles of plan making, which is if it's already somewhere else, generally you don't need to repeat it because it's there. And in part that's for the reasons that you've already explained. Generally, what we might do is put more referencing or hooks, as we might call them, into the policy, and then signpost people to the accompanying guidance, or as James has already explained, and quite neatly in terms of this example, the idea that then it can be amplified further and further information could be given through a supplementary planning document, as we explained about the approach to SUDS. So yes, simply because it is not necessarily mentioned in the DIPS doesn't mean that it's not something that is taken into account when the local planning authority determine planning applications.
So that was just to be clear. I mean, that was never my intention to alter policy. If, as a layman, if you was to dive into this document and to read through the items that I've drawn out, it's just a question of further reference that perhaps in just some of the areas just lack slightly. So it wasn't a policy change I was referring to.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Weston. Can I turn to Councillor Lever?
Thank you. And then I think it's probably good to maybe now touch on, because I'm aware that Councillor Jarman made a recommendation. I'm not sure if there's a recommendation that came from Councillor Spink, but just to better understand those. So Councillor Jarman's recommendation, can you just remind us what the recommendation was, Councillor Jarman, before I...
Happily, but without reading all again, I'm sure they've got a copy of it. It was to respect the contributions that were sent in by the residents and the parish councils of the West White, principally on two things. One was to limit the development of properties, and particularly prioritising brownfield sites and those which are renovations of existing properties. We have a number of empty flats, for example, above shops, and I appreciate that that will result in a lower number, and specifically to retain the boundaries as hard where they are without including the additional sites adjacent to them. Those have been made many times by the residents and by the parishes. They are very well supported and they've been forcibly made. The key thing is we are happy to have certain types of housing provided, very happy, provided it's low-cost rental properties. We love it very much. It meets the needs of our residents and fits in very much with our local plan. What we have a problem with is the very large number of houses which have been developed over the last 10 years and the proposal to build 252 more of them when we have a massive infrastructure and sewage problem already.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear, what is the housing number recommended by those residents as opposed to the one that's in the dips at the moment?
I don't recommend a specific number. I don't believe we've done that as a parish. What we've done is to limit the sites which are applicable for development, the prioritisation of types of sites that we would like to be brought forward, including the extant sites that we already have within the parish, and specifically to make the boundaries that we have at the moment hard, and not to extend those boundaries by including adjacent sites. So I think the detail of that has been made very well by the parish council. It would obviously be too much for me to read all of it out here and probably inappropriate, but I think the officers will be well aware of it.
That's fine. I think myself, and as part of this committee meeting now, I'd feel uncomfortable removing a number for an area of the island that is currently evidenced and replacing it with no number that I have not seen evidenced. So I certainly wouldn't want to recommend that the initial part of the recommendation proposed by Councillor Jarman. So I'll move on from that anyway. So if anybody else would like to say that, I'd welcome them to, but I wouldn't support it. The next part was Councillor Spink. Was there a recommendation from you? Sorry,
I don't think I specifically made a requested a recommendation. Perhaps I should have done. I took the view that that I'd made a number of points and it was up to the committee to then consider any recommendations that came from those points. But if I may be permitted to clarify, I would ask the committee to consider recommending further consideration by Cabinet of the overall number of 453 houses per year, on the basis that is there sufficient evidence to show that that number is deliverable? And in addition, I'd ask for a recommendation that the changes that I put forward as a matter of law in relating to allocated sites, if Cabinet accepts my interpretation of the law, do they consider this as being made clear to local authorities and ward councillors? And if not, recommendation that it is.
So the second point I guess it's not necessarily a recommendation, but I'd certainly say that if you've got what you believe to be differing legal advice, it'd be good to pass that on so that we can be made aware of it. I wouldn't like to make a recommendation yet, having not seen that. But by all means, do pass that on, please, because I'd be interested to see it. The first point, I think what I remember from what you said earlier in the meeting, Councillor Spink, and the rationale you gave for reducing the number as it is, similar to what I said about Councillor Jarman's recommendation. I think that some of the points you made were around going forward with the dips. In essence, there was resistance to that because it would condemn us to more flooding. But where I'm sitting, if we don't pass the dips, we're reliant on the national policy framework, which asks us to deliver more housing, and without the policy that we've been talking about. So whether you think this document is perfect or not, in my mind, it gives us a much better chance than what we have without it. So I can't support anything that would change the numbers we've come to at the moment with the evidence that's been provided without, as I said before, some evidence that suggests a better route to do it.
I understand what you're saying, but the figure of 453 should be supported by evidence. Evidence prepared by those who've prepared the plan. It's not for me to provide the evidence of 453. Cabinet needs to be satisfied that 453 houses per year can actually physically be built on the island. Otherwise, we would be setting the island up to fail because we won't hit the target and we'll end up back in the tilted balance, which is the whole reason of having a plan, to get out of that. So I don't believe that. The other concerning thing is that if there's not evidence that 453 is deliverable, then the inspector may well say that the plan fails because it's no longer sound. It's not a sound plan. Now, all I'm asking is for Cabinet to consider, between now and the time that the plan comes back to full council, if it does, that whether or not 453 is actually a deliverable number and whether there's evidence to support it. Because I don't believe it is deliverable, but I don't have the resources, I don't have the planning resources that that Cabinet has and which the Alliance has.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I think we've probably rehearsed that quite a bit. I mean, we have heard what you say, very much so. I know that officers have already responded to that and made their position quite clear. I think it's fair to say that the Cabinet will doubtless consider that everything has been said today. I have to agree with my colleague, Councillor Lever, that I would struggle to put that forward as a recommendation at this stage, but I'm sure that they will consider it. I'm just really conscious that if we don't make a fairly sharp set of decisions, we won't have any recommendations whatsoever, which I think would be a mistake. I've cut mine down. In fact, I think most of those will be put through as separate things. There is one particular thing I will raise. However, before I take that forward and before we actually look at the recommendations, Councillor Lever, you've been very careful to go through things yourself. Is there anything additional you wish to make or any recommendations you want to suggest at this stage?
Not from myself, Chair. I'm conscious that you do have recommendations that you consulted with me earlier, so I'm happy to move to yourself now.
That's most welcome. Thank you. Okay. Two things which I would like to bring to consideration is T2A and on the Military Road, and subsequent, I believe, 20. Oh, hang on, that's my specific reference. It comes back to page 169, again about the Military Road. I just want to emphasise that it's not just a tourist route. It is a critical route. And I think that Ventnor's experiences over the last few days where they basically had one winding approach to the place is emphasizes why places like Freshwater, where I used to live, if we lose the military road, then we are down to two routes. And if with two routes, we could easily be back with Gold Command, Silver Command, and everybody else being supplied with Freshwater being supplied by helicopter. And I'm sure that councillors from that area would prefer not to happen. So coming back to it, my recommendation is that we mentioned specifically that the military road retention is a priority. That's a recommendation which I'd ask the committee to consider. The second thing is actually relatively simple. EV5D, it references buffer zones for ancient woodland. I have expressed this concern in planning. I've spent quite a long time researching this. This is an area which I know something about. I'd like to suggest that the DIPS specifically references that the buffer zone should be 50 metres for all ancient woodland, which was agreed by the House of Lords, but then subsequently overturned by Parliament. It's already true that veteran trees are supposed to have larger buffer zones anyway. I know that this sounds arcane, but actually it refers to quite a number of the sites that Councillor Fuller mentioned, and it also has an effect on Parkhurst, partly because Parkhurst Forest is one of our major woodland areas, and if you start impinging on the ecology and ecosystems of those areas, then you start causing some serious biodiversity damage. Those are my two things. There are numbers which others which I will mention separately, which brings us on to the recommendations which we're going to be putting forward at this stage. I've asked the officer, I've asked Mel to produce that list of recommendations. I know she's been beavering away quite hard to try and interpret all of the various statements that everybody's made. Can I just confirm that we have a list of recommendations at this stage that the committee can consider to take forward?
I have noted down some recommendations. As you will appreciate, it is hard to capture them all. I did miss one from Councillor Quirk earlier, and I haven't quite captured that one you mentioned about the woodland buffer zone. If you're able to say that again, that would be useful.
I can do that in a few words. Recommend extend buffer zones for ancient woodland to 50 metres.
Sorry, Chair, that you're recommending changing from 15.15 to 50?
Yeah.
5, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I trust people in the House of Lords to have looked at the same evidence that I have. That was their recommendation. I would strongly suggest that we follow their idea. We are supposed to be an island that protects our environment, and we should start with the most high biodiverse areas that we can.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't questioning the intent. I just thought you'd said 15, which was already in the document.
So
Sorry, if I go through the recommendations. And we'll
one thing to mention first, now that we've only got 12 minutes left of the meeting, is that if you don't feel that we're going to be able to complete the task, we need to agree to extend the meeting now, really. Needs to be half of the committee to agree to just extend the meeting to allow us to. But it depends if you agree on what I've written. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and potentially 7.
It's been suggested that we extend the meeting for 15 minutes from Councillor Quirk. I do apologise for everybody. I didn't expect to be extending the meeting. It's doubtless down to my appalling chairing, so I apologise utterly and completely. Would anybody like to support that extension? councillor Beston has supported that extension.
Okay, so
If
it might
required.
not take that long, but we'll try. So the first recommendation is that Cabinet are to consider how the dips might be amended to address the recent flooding.
Do we need?
I will suggest that motion. Would anybody like to second it? Okay, councillor Quirk has seconded it, and would we all agree or not? Yep. We have unanimity on that.
Another one is to recommend that Cabinet strengthen and update the links regarding references to policies and strategies such as the Isle of Wight Strategic Flood Risk Assessment, the SUDS Manual, and the Isle of Wight Planning Enforcement Strategy, and to include them in section 1.15, which is what councillor Beston was referring to.
I'll second that. We're all agreed on that.
Cabinet to consider weaving modular housing into the options and type of housing design and make additional reference within the dips.
Proposed by councillor Beston, seconded by councillor Quirk, supported by everybody.
Okay. Cabinet to incorporate the completed bay plan to mirror the approach taken in including the ride plan in the draft strategy.
Can we just add to there and any additional
Yeah.
and any additional local area strategies? Because I know that several have been mentioned.
Yeah.
Do we have a proposal for that? I presume councillor Quirk, councillor Beston supported it, and the rest of us agree.
Okay. Then the next one I have is that Cabinet consider that Military Road is treated as an essential route. Is that correct in what you were trying to put forward?
I'm quite happy to accept that wording, and funnily enough, I will propose that. Seconded by councillor Quirk,
Okay.
and we're in agreement with that.
And then the committee recommend that Cabinet consider amending the buffer zone for ancient woodland to 50 metres.
Again, I will propose that. Do I have a seconder? And everybody's agreed on that.
Okay, there was one that was mentioned by councillor Quirk, I think regarding sewage perhaps, that I didn't quite get the wording of.
Cabinet to review issues raised by town and parish councils regarding sewage capacity.
Okay, so if I heard that correctly, the recommendation is for Cabinet to review issues raised by town and parish councils regarding sewage capacity. Yeah, okay, yeah. To be included in the dips.
I will second that.
Okay,
Yes, we do actually agree.
okay. That's all the recommendations I have noted down. That didn't take 15 minutes at all.
On the basis that we have dealt with item 6, there is only one more item that we're supposed to deal with here, which is the work plan. However, as this is an additional extra meeting, we have the work plan set up for the next meeting in January, which is around the visitor economy. Do we have any additional points to make at this stage? We may have an informal meeting later on. No, that would suggest that we, let me look at the formalities of the meeting. Unless I've forgotten something, we can call the meeting to a close at 19:53. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and time.